It's unfortunate. And earlier I sort of used that example of like you get the 1,000 Loblaw stores and you think you hit the jackpot, right? And then you realize, oh, I've got listing fees, I've got all these hidden costs, and oh yeah, if it doesn't sell, they're going to kick me off the shelf, and I still owe them all that money. I think the other challenge is for most retailers, there's payment terms. So you send them the product and they don't pay you for a month. So cash flow can become a big problem there as well. At some point, you're likely going to expand, even if it's not into regular brick and mortar. You're probably going to expand in other websites, the well.ca's, Amazon, etc. So at that point, your pricing is going to be really important, and they're going to be looking at your D2C history in store.
As you can see, we've got ourselves an amazing guest today. His name is Justin Osborne, and we're tackling how to get your supplement brand, your food brand, into retailer stores, into bigger distribution networks, and to do it in a sustainable and healthy manner so that you don't get killed through hidden fees or cash flow issues. Now, two things to note. Number one, Justin also has his own podcast. It's called Hearts and Carts. And every week they feature new entrepreneurs and industry experts. And I think there are a lot of great lessons in there that I think a lot of future business owners may take away from and learn a lot from. And number two, I apologize for the sound quality on my end. At the time of filming with Justin, I was piping sound through my AirPods and not through this mic, so the sound quality ain't great, and I apologize for that. Now, with that said, let's get on to the interview.
All right. Hey, Justin, good to see you. It's been a while. Thank you for being a part of the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I've watched some of the videos. They're awesome. Excited I can be part of it.
Thank you, sir. So why don't we just kick it off? Maybe give a bit of background about yourself.
Justin Osborne. I've been in the CPG space now for, almost 13 years, which seems wild. Started, more in the traditional CPG space, working for kind of the tier one companies in the Toronto area. So the PepsiCos, the Pfizers, SE Johnsons of the world, working in different roles, kind of like, sales, marketing, sales strategy, category development. Some of those terms might not make sense to people who've heard them for the first time, but just different areas of sales and marketing. And then had the opportunity to move across the country to Vancouver and work for a natural company, Vega, which is where I met Brian, of course, and worked there on the sales strategy side for a few years, and then moved over to managing the Canadian sales team there. For the past year, I've worked for a company called Eat and Beyond Global Holdings, which is an investment issuer, basically a private equity company that invests in small plant-based startups. My role is almost like a fractional VP of sales. So I work on about 3 companies at a time, develop a sales strategy for them, build them up, get distributors, brokers set up, proper P&L, try and grow them to a place where they can hire a full sales team. And I sort of, move on to the next companies.
The viewers, the audience members, they're trying to start their own supplement brand. They're trying to start their own functional food brand. Area of friction for a lot of brands that are starting up is the manufacturer cost. It's like, hey, if I want to create XYZ formula with this particular function or ingredient, the costs are so high, especially at a low MOQ.
Yeah.
Is it then just a volume play? Is it re-engineering the formula? Any initial thoughts for, again, a really small startup brand?
Yeah, and you know this incredibly well, right? I've heard you talk about this, but the MOQ problem is huge for people starting out. It's always easier to reduce your price than it is to increase it, right? So if you want to start at a higher price and then reduce it as you achieve those economies of scale, that's great. Every customer in the world is going to say yes to a lower price. Or you look at what does a steady state look like, and you have to take a short-term loss. You should be realistic with what that steady state looks like, though, and see. So if there's, 4 tiers of MOQs, you might be somewhere towards the lower one. But look at that and build your P&L off that. And as it becomes more profitable, I would take those earnings and reinvest it into marketing and trade spend and growing the business.
Let's talk a little bit about trade spend and maybe some other costs tied to it, if you don't mind. Maybe educate me a little bit on what trade spend is and how much one should think about budgeting for.
Yeah, so trade spend, there's sort of 2 buckets in how you spend on your brand to grow it. There's the marketing spend, and then there's trade spend, sort of the way that I look at it, right? So marketing spend is probably exactly what you're thinking, right? Anything like a flyer, a TV commercial or an ad online or any of those types of things, social media. Trade spend is dollars that you're spending with a retailer to actually sell the product. So when you go into a store and there's an in-store feature, $1 off, when there's an end cap in a store, when there's a flyer that you receive from a Walmart or something like that, and there's a program in it. Any type of activity with a retailer is trade spend. And in the online space, it's the same. It's buying things on Amazon, participating in Black Friday, Cyber Monday, all those kind of things. So that would be classified as trade spend. Within that, there is something called listing slotting fees or free fills. So whenever you bring on a new customer, this is something that I find a lot of people don't plan for. When you bring on a new customer, it's not free to get on their shelf. You have to pay them to get that placement on shelf. In Canada, it's usually listing fees. So you have to pay them, and it ranges, the amount ranges, but it's usually a few $1,000s per SKU to get on shelf at any of the major retailers. In the US, they call it slotting fees, or free fills is the more common one, where basically the first time you go on their shelf, you give them free product to fill the entire shelf at every one of their stores. So their first order is free, essentially, is how it works. So that can be very expensive. I got into Loblaws and it's 1,000 stores and amazing, right? But it's like, now you've got to send free product to 1,000 stores. And if you're a small brand, that's a huge ramp up like that. So that can get very expensive. And I think that's why the importance of like scaling slowly and in the right spots is really important, and making sure that you're right for the Loblaws, the Walmarts of the world, the Costcos of the world when you get there, right? It's important to start almost regionally and then grow into that.
Listing fees, you talked about. Any other hidden costs with regards to like retailers or even online retailers? Anything around that at all?
Yeah, there's a lot. I feel like I'm being pessimistic here, but this is the realistic. There's a lot of hidden costs in here that as you start to hear them, you're like, oh my gosh, what is going on in this world? But there's O&A, which is allowances, right? That go in there. There's freight fees. There's a co-op fee with most retailers, which can be 10%, which is basically the buy-in to work on their programs. Be a spoils allowance usually, right? There's a lot in there, and that's so your trade spend quickly you'll see will creep up to 20%, because by the time you factor in 10% of actual spend, and then 0.5% on spoil allowance and 1% on O&A and all these things, it adds up pretty quick.
You bring a good point. It's like thinking about all of this stuff now from a quality, compliance, regulatory. It's like, okay, how do we engineer the most efficient product possible? Get the claim you need, but at the best rate, so that we can kind of absorb some of these things. But this has been really enlightening so far. Anything else from a metric standpoint that comes to mind, or do we hit the big buckets?
The other big one I would say to truly measure the health of your product when you get it onto shelves is sales per point of distribution, SPPD. That's really your velocity. So because if you look at, you say you're selling $1 million, that might sound great, but if you're in 1 million stores, that's not great. Right. So what that's measuring is how much your product is selling at each individual store. And that's what retailers are going to look like to make decisions on whether or not they keep you, what they look like. And that information, usually you have to purchase Nielsen or IRI data for that information. If you're shipping direct to stores, you can backwards engineer the math pretty quick to figure it out. But that to me is the golden metric on the health of a business, is sales per point of distribution.
Beautiful. How about we kind of change gears a little bit and talk about marketing strategy? How do you go to market from a distribution standpoint, broker, or maybe direct to consumers?
Maybe I'll start with the difference between what a distributor and a broker is. Maybe that's a good place to start. A distributor is someone that takes your product from your co-packer, from your manufacturing site, and brings it to your customers. So it distributes the product. A broker is sort of like a sales team that works for you. So the broker goes in and they represent multiple clients when they sell to customers. So a lot of smaller companies can't afford a full sales team, so they hire a broker, and then it's almost like they have a fractional sales team out there selling for them. So in Canada, some of the big distributors are Unify, Tree of Life, Horizon, John Luca. Some of the big brokers are Advantage, Acosta, Propel, Indigo, Lebeau. If you search, you can find these pretty easily. There's a lot of them. And a lot of the big ones are big in Canada and the US. They're total North America. So usually if you're a small company, you'll need to go through a distributor in order to get access to all of these locations. So if you're selling to Unify, let's say, they are able to ship product to every grocery store, drugstore, mass store in North America. So by selling your product to them, they physically have the trucks to go bring it to all those stores. So that's usually a good option for companies starting up. But a reminder, there is that 23 to 30% markup that they're taking that's going to either eat into your cost or increase the price of your product.
With regards to distributors, a lot of these startups or entrepreneurs, they're thinking like, when we're talking about distribution, are we just paying for the trucks? Can't I just hire FedEx to do it? Why UNFI? Or does UNFI also get you into these stores? Or is that like the separate function that you're saying, with regards to the brokers?
Yeah, so most of the distributors do have a sales team as well that can go in, sell the product, knows the retailers. The challenge with that is that most of the distributors represent a lot of brands. So the time that you're getting with each individual account manager going into Metro, they're representing 200 brands going into Metro. So you're probably not going to get a lot of their time. And that's usually why you hire a broker, to get a little bit more focus. But the UNFI does have a sales team, and they handle all the listing forms. They work with the retailers. They've already got access to all those. I don't think that, every Metro in Canada wants a FedEx truck showing up, right? They get their order from UNFI and it's got your product and then, 200 other products on there. So it's a lot easier for the retailer from that sense. I guess DTC is complete. That's where, you can use FedEx or UPS or something like that, right? I think there's two, effective ways to do DTC. One is just your website, which of course, like traditional way. The other one is Amazon. So Amazon operates in two models. There's 1P and 3P. So 1P is you're selling your product to Amazon and then they sell it like a traditional retailer. 3P, or third party with Amazon, is you're using them as a marketplace. So if you ever go on Amazon and you see ships and sold from someone other than Amazon, they're just using that as a surface basically for their direct consumer, and they're shipping you the product directly. So if, Amazon gets a lot more traffic than most websites. So it's a good option to do a third party website on there in addition to your DTC strategy.
Let's talk about brokers a little bit more. How do we approach them?
Yeah, most of them have just websites you can go on to and reach out to. And they have application forms a lot of time too. And then they'll just set up a meeting with you. If you go to any of the trade shows like CHFA West or East in Canada or Expo East or West in the US, they're usually like the platinum and gold sponsors. So you can find them pretty easily. They'll have huge booths. So if you ever go to those shows, but best route is just to go to their website and they'll have a form to fill out and they'll get right back to you. Another question a lot of people have is, even if you don't want to do the broker thing or distributor thing, like how do you get in touch with retailers? And it's a lot the same, right? Like I think our world's changed a little bit where we don't have the same level of gatekeepers because you can find almost any buyer at almost any retailer on LinkedIn. So like you can search and look for people and, okay, I'm selling yogurt to Metro. Let's go find the dairy buyer at Metro on LinkedIn. You can probably find them. Do they like you reaching out to them like that? Maybe, maybe not, but it's an option, right? If you're trying to get a bit of traction. And I think even just going to stores is a bit of a lost art, and maybe through COVID, we lost it even more, but just grinding and checking out those local stores and talking to the store managers, and you might be able to get some traction in your first 15, 20 stores that way.
I've heard horror stories about growing too quickly, cash flow being an issue. When is the right time to go from D2C to like a broker, distributors, or something else? Are there milestones we should be watching out for?
Yeah.
What should they consider?
I like to think of it as a bit of a rollout strategy. Like I wouldn't even think of nationals like a Loblaws, Walmart, Sobeys in the first 2 years. I would really start with DTC, Amazon, maybe a few other websites. And then I would look at, in your hometown, just growing in some natural independence. You should be able to get some sales in 15, 20 stores just by visiting them and talking to store managers. If you can't get a single store, then you probably need to look at your product, right? So I would start there. Once you're at the level where you're in a few websites, you're in 20, 30 stores, that's where I'd start to think about having the distributor conversation and say, okay, I want to make this bigger. And then you can go after some of the larger regional independents, the Healthy Planets, Goodness Me's, Choices of the world. From there, it would be sort of rolling into the regional players like a Metro, that type of account, and then going into nationals. So I wouldn't even approach nationals until you're at least $250,000 in sales. I think before that, you won't have the cash reserves to pay for listing fees, to support the product well. And if you launch in those and you don't have enough money to support the product, it's inevitably going to fail. It's unfortunate. And earlier I sort of used that example of like you get the 1,000 Loblaw stores and you think you hit the jackpot, right? And then you realize, oh, I've got listing fees, I've got all these hidden costs. And oh yeah, if it doesn't sell, they're going to kick me off the shelf and I still owe them all that money. I think the other challenge is for most retailers, there's payment terms. So you send them the product and they don't pay you for a month. So cash flow can become a big problem there as well. And if you get kicked out of one of those nationals like a Loblaws, it's going to be really hard to get back in. So instead of it being a 2-year window, it's going to be like a 10-year window, right? So I think it's important to start online, super small regionally in your hometown, in your area, and then sort of expand to those independents. That's where you're going to get a lot of the brand love and, you know, consumer love, and then slowly expand. I think people get excited by the shiny object of number of stores and top line revenue, but it goes back to the unit economics that we were talking about and building it sustainably. So starting just with those small regional guys and building out from there.
You learn so much about your consumer, right? Going through that growth and understanding what resonates with them and tweaking your value proposition, your claims, et cetera, versus just going to retailers. But everyone wants to get into the big stores, right?
At some point, you're likely going to expand, even if it's not into regular brick and mortar. You're probably going to expand in other websites, you know, the well.ca's, Amazon, et cetera. So at that point, your pricing is going to be really important, and they're going to be looking at your D2C history in store. And it's tough, right, to if you do have something like that, to say no to it or distracted by it. But an amazing piece of advice that I received from Mike Fata was, if you live in one of the major cities in Canada, you know, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, if you live in one of those major cities, if you have 4 SKUs, you should be able to do $1 million in your city. So like that should be something that you can be able to do just by expanding in retailers and websites within your own city before expanding outward. A lot of people launch 20 SKUs. They just keep launching SKUs. And they're looking to try and expand to get a store in BC, but they're located in Montreal. And it's like, grow your region first and then worry about expansion. Because as soon as you do that, it gets, you know, vastly more complicated. I think another like super simple piece of advice on sort of the marketing side that we talked about a lot when I was at sort of like the tier 1 companies is this idea of 5 seconds from 5 feet. So a consumer shopping the shelf should understand what your product is, why it's differentiated, and why they would buy it in 5 seconds from 5 feet. So it's not a lot of time, but that's how your packaging should work for you. So a lot of times there's super small claims or things hidden on the bottom inch, which gets covered with a lip of a tray, or things on the back that the consumer's not going to pick it up and look at. So it's important that the front of that packaging works really, really hard for you.
Good point. Yeah, that packaging play is so important. I think often neglected, especially when they're starting out. People are thinking about the functional ingredient benefit. Rightfully so. As an entrepreneur, you want to brag about your product, so they use the side panels to do that. But you're absolutely right. You got to hit that message right off the bat. You are a wealth of information, Justin. Any aspirations of creating your own brand?
I had this question a couple of times. I was on This Commerce Life podcast, and they asked me if I had the itch to start my own company. And so I'll give you the same answer I gave them. I don't have any ideas that are good enough. If I did, maybe I would. But I said, you know, if some amazing idea comes to me, that would be awesome, and I would love to. If somebody came to me with a product that I went, that's the one, I'd get behind it for sure. So that's hopefully something that happens at some point in my life, and I can ride that wave.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that does happen, and maybe we might connect. You never know. Speaking of podcasts, I know that you've got one, Hearts and Cards, and I have to say I've learned a lot from your visitors or guests. They're telling their CPG story, and I encourage anyone watching this video to definitely check out this podcast. I'm listening to it on the regular. I've binged on many of your episodes. Maybe tell us a little bit more about Hearts and Carts. That'd be great, and how people can find you.
Sure. Yeah. And Brian's going to be a future guest. So there's a shout out there. You have to listen for that one. So we are a weekly podcast, Hearts and Carts, with myself and my co-host, Alex Hill. We are all about the people behind the products that are winning hearts and filling carts. So that's the reason behind the name. It's a podcast that features interviews with CPG professionals, leaders, entrepreneurs, different people in the space to learn about their career path, get some insight, advice, knowledge. And really the idea is the next generation of CPG professionals or entrepreneurs, how can we arm them with some advice and information? It's almost like we're publishing these coffee chats that I wish that I could have had when I was starting out, and sharing some of those stories, because some of these people have just done some incredible things, and the little pieces of advice that they're able to provide are gold nuggets. So it's been a really enjoyable experience. We've had a lot of fun on it, and yeah, would love everyone to listen.
Just the stories that they're sharing, the challenges. I think we've hit on some of the themes here, but you obviously went into way more detail. But yeah, a lot of lessons. Really, really good podcast. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, no, we've got some good ones, and some people that coming up as well. So it's always fun when you can hear an ex-colleague or people in the industry that you worked with. That's always a fun part of it too. Catching up with people is kind of nice, in this COVID digital world. It's been nice to reconnect with a lot of people like yourself that haven't talked to in a few years, and it's always fun.
Justin, thank you so much. This was tremendous. Lots of information. I learned a lot today, so thank you again for doing this.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Brian.